All right, we're going to have a look at the stories that are making headlines around the world this morning, and we start with the story that most of the international papers are leading with. Of course, what went on in the German Parliament yesterday, the decision to support a more powerful fund to bail out troubled economies in the Eurozone. The lead article in the European edition of the Wall Street Journal points out that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel got the measure passed much more easily than she might initially have expected.
International investors expect the world economy to relapse into a recession, with more than 1 in 3 forecasting a global economic meltdown within the next year. That, according to a Bloomberg poll published in the China Daily.
Now, according to the UK's Daily Telegraph, the US Federal Reserve's chairman Bernanke says America is facing a crisis with a jobless rate at or above 9% since April 2009, and that fiscal discipline would help spur the economic recovery.
The International Herald Tribune reports on India's ambition to become globally competitive. The IHT says this has led many companies to increase international merger activity. But recent market volatility has meant that companies are not choosing to spend billions in international acquisitions.
Now, the Times highlights the situation in Bahrain, where a military court has sentenced a group of medics to up to 15 years in jail for treating anti-government demonstrators during protests earlier this year. They were found guilty on charges that included inciting the overthrow of the government and of provoking sectarian hatred. Okay, we're joined by Bundeep Rangar, Chairman of IndusView. Thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning, Bundeep, and going through the papers with us. Well, let's start where virtually all the newspapers are starting this morning, events in Berlin yesterday, and how Angela Merkel may have shown herself to be a pretty nimble politician.
Yeah, definitely astute and definitely good news for the world economy. I think stocks will be up this morning based on that good news. If the last elections that were held in Germany saw the opposition win more seats in Merkel's party, but they didn't win it because they were against bailing out Greece or helping out the Eurozone. They actually were in favor of it. So that was one little signal that I think Merkel got, saying, look, don't presume that your party's stance on the Euro is going to be contrasted by the popular vote. It's not. What's really good about this, of course, is that the size has increased. 440 billion.
But it's not big enough, according to most people.
It's not big enough given the size of the debt that was being held. So you look at, particularly Italy's debt, which is 120% of GDP. Well, Italy is 14% of the European Union, as opposed to Greece, which is less than 2%. So, even 100% plus of debt in GDP for Greece is small in the old Eurozone.
And does this not highlight the problem, because we have more votes to come, more nations are yet to vote, two in October? Does it not highlight the problem that all the way along Eurozone leaders have been behind the curve?
As in the U.S., absolutely. It's been a question of political will and political process, and I think the key word here is speed, right? We've got Finland past their issue of having Greece not have collateralized assets against it. Now the question is, will places like Slovakia pass it fast enough? Because there are 17 countries that have to approve this.
14 of which have already done so.
The 3 standing, and of course, the speed is real question here. Really.
Well, this article also points out that what happened yesterday was that the German Parliament voted to give itself a veto on any further negotiations regarding the Eurozone. So therefore, our hands are tied hereafter.
Well, that, and also given the fact they're half the contributors to this fund, Germany's contributing in excess of 200 billion, they are going to be calling the shots, aren't they? I guess the main thing is it's a measure of confidence in the market, and that's the real good signal here, given the fact that Italy is selling its debt at the most expensive rate ever since the Eurozone was created.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. The next article, World Recession. The concern about this is that there is a lot of outstanding debt, and the ability to service it is going to be dependent on economies' ability to grow. But it looks like they're not going to grow, so that's another problem.
The big sort of revelation in this survey here was that, unlike the past, where Asian investors were always optimistic, more than half the people polled there were not as optimistic as before, and hence pessimistic about where the economy was going. And that's a reflection of where China and India and certainly the other BRIC countries are vis-a-vis the last time we had a global recession, in 2008, 2009. That skepticism, pessimism is playing its way in because they're not exporting as much, just as the West is certainly not growing as fast, has an aging demograph, and as you said, growth is slowing. So there is certainly cause for concern. I'm not sure alarmist cause for concern, but cause for concern.
Well, isn't this a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because you can actually talk yourself into recession, can't you? I mean, many people were accused of that last time.
And certainly when the IMF and World Bank stats came out and Christine Lagarde went on air saying we've got a real danger here, there's absolutely a danger that fear creates more fear and hence more panic in a recession. The flip side, of course, here is that I think it is in excess. I think countries will go out. Commodity prices are dropping. Some of the raw material prices are dropping. And if you get into large infrastructure spending, Britain needs it, India needs it, I think you'll see certainly consumption go up and maybe a confidence in the consumer consumption, which is a big part of U.S. growth.
But there's still quite healthy growth, isn't there, in most of the major Asian economies. Is that not enough to drive the rest of the world?
And it's also a question of what the definition is. So the IMF sees 3% or less growth to be recessionary. Well, the last time we had less was 2009 when the economy shrunk 0.9%. Contrast that with last year, we grew worldwide at 5.1%. So, it's a question of where do you set the bar, and I don't believe we'll hit that recessionary threshold. I think it's more saying, guys, it's a wake-up call not to get too complacent.
Martine there highlighted the problems with negative talking. The head of the US Central Bank I should think Obama really is almost on the brink of getting a fatwa out against him. He said the US jobless is a national crisis. Obama has been taking some fairly dramatic moves to try to correct this, but the head of the US Central Bank thinks that they're in trouble.
And it is time for elections in the United States, and the rhetoric that's going to come out from Obama and other leaders will be towards jobs and the creation of growth. What Bernanke is doing, I guess, is saying don't pass the buck on to the Federal Reserve Bank and look at monetary policy to solve political or economic issues. You can't. You can only go so far with interest rates. They're already rock bottom. So now the issue is much more a political one, a fiscal one, and saying, yeah, look at the unemployment figures, look at the slowing growth, and of course with the U.S. dollar being kind of rising, that certainly doesn't help exports in the U.S. So it is going to be more of a political issue as we head to an election, and here's a warning shot from the central bank.
Right, moving on to, we know you travel an awful lot, Bundeep, and you know India pretty well. Indian executives are finding it less expensive to buy a business abroad than to build a plant with new technology.
Right, interesting. Well, I guess there's a few things here. One, of course, as you've got asset prices dropping overseas, targets that have always been in sight for Indian companies suddenly get more attractive. They're cheaper. Secondly, India's reforms in terms of making inward investment more amenable have slowed down a little bit, and certain sectors haven't opened up as much. Hence, the opening of a new technology company may be more difficult than predicted. So all that cash pile that Indian companies are sitting on is now much more attractive as an acquisition currency overseas, and with global ambitions that you see from the likes of Tata, of course, it is going to be time for acquisitions overseas.
Talking about investment destinations, what we read about Bahrain and the jailing of doctors is not an encouraging sign if you are an investor in that part of the world.
It is, and it's also a bit shameful, right? You've got doctors out there to help and support people regardless of what their background is and regardless of their political affiliation. And it is real hypocrisy to then prosecute them by a regime that itself is questionable, with the U.S. the Naval Fifth Fleet is sitting there as its domicile. And I think that it creates a real issue for U.S. foreign policy. On the one hand, you heard Hillary Clinton lambast Syria. Well, how is Bahrain much different when they're prosecuting doctors for 5
Just to be clear about this, the government accused them of conspiring to overthrow the monarchy.
Of course. That's what they would say, right? Because they're helping dissidents. Well,
interesting also that on that page in the Times, which unfortunately we can't show you, there is a think piece by Hugh Tomlinson who talks about the position of the West and says the West is an impotent bystander.
And it's too strategically important a country for them to do anything further, and that's a problem. Right? With Saudi's blessing, of course.
Now, very quickly, now we don't want to up the ante or put the pressure on you, but fatherhood is good for the heart.
I somehow missed that article completely. I don't know what happened.
This is all about the idea that
Sure.
Men are less prone to heart disease if they have children.
They're more tired, that's why.
Be more responsible, safer, more exercise, cut down bad habits. I think that probably...
It's a kick for your testosterone, apparently, but it helps a man stay alive.
And there's a self-fulfilling prophecy again for today morning. Absolutely. Well, yeah, I guess it's good. I'll find out in a few years.
Oh, and a marriage, having lots of friends, even a dog can lower the chance of heart problems.
Yes, that's much cheaper, isn't it?
Yeah, my recommendation would be to get a dog.
A couple of dogs, I think, is the way to go for that one. Absolutely.
It also takes reasonably good genes to father a child. An inability to do so might mean a genetic weakness that can spell heart trouble down the road.
As a question, what reasonably bad genes?
We've not been
You see why I left that article.
Altogether more complicated.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Bundeep Rangar of IndusView. Thank you very much indeed for coming through and taking us through the papers this morning. Thank you, and thank you very much for being with us.
Bye-bye.